November 4th, 1928, 10:30 at night, room 349, the Park Central Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Arnold Rothstein staggered down the service stairs, clutching his stomach, blood seeping through his fingers, his tuxedo shirt soaked dark. He'd been shot once, point blank, in the abdomen. A maid found him slumped on the landing. He was conscious. He was lucid. He was the most powerful gambler in America. And when the detectives leaned in and asked who pulled the trigger, Rothstein looked them dead in the eye and whispered 5 words that would echo through Mafia history. "Me mudder did it." Then he refused to say another word. 2 days later, he was dead. This wasn't just another mob hit. Arnold Rothstein was the man who allegedly fixed the 1919 World Series, the man who bankrolled bootlegging on a continental scale, the man who taught a young Sicilian named Charlie Luciano and a young Jewish kid named Meyer Lansky how organized crime could be run like General Motors. When he died over a 48-hour poker debt, he left behind a financial empire worth millions and a power vacuum that would reshape America. His murder was never officially solved. This is the story of the real men behind Boardwalk Empire. The flesh and blood gangsters HBO turned into legends. Nucky Johnson, the Boardwalk King who ran Atlantic City like his personal kingdom for 30 years. Al Capone, the Brooklyn butcher's son who became the most feared man in Chicago. Charlie Lucky Luciano, the visionary who built the 5 families. Meyer Lansky, the financial genius who outlived them all. And Arnold Rothstein, the man who made it all possible before a bullet ended him in that hotel room. This is what HBO got right. This is what they got wrong. And this is the brutal truth they couldn't put on television. But here's what most viewers never realized. The events of Boardwalk Empire weren't just inspired by history, they actually happened. In 1929, in Atlantic City, in a single hotel suite, the men who would dominate American crime for the next 50 years sat down together and divided up the country. And the man hosting that meeting wasn't a fictional character. He was real, and he was untouchable, until he wasn't. To understand the real Nucky, you have to forget Steve Buscemi. The man HBO called Nucky Thompson was actually Enoch Louis Johnson. Born January 20th, 1883, in Smithville, New Jersey. Over 6 foot, 200 pounds, a red carnation in his lapel every single day. A different woman on his arm every weekend. He didn't slink around in shadows. He drove a powder blue Rolls-Royce down Atlantic Avenue with a chauffeur in matching uniform. He lived in a 9-room suite at the Ritz-Carlton that cost him $1,000 a month in 1925 money. That's roughly $18,000 a month today, just for the rent. Nucky's father had been the Atlantic County Sheriff, so Nucky grew up understanding one fundamental truth. Power in America didn't come from being elected. It came from controlling who got elected. By 1911, at 28 years old, he was the Atlantic County Treasurer. By 1914, he was the undisputed boss of the Republican political machine in South Jersey. He controlled the police. He controlled the judges. He controlled the docks. And when Prohibition arrived in 1920, he controlled something even better. He controlled the coastline. You have to understand what Atlantic City was in that era. It wasn't a fading resort town. It was the entertainment capital of the eastern seaboard. 12 million visitors a year. Hotels stacked along the boardwalk. And every single one of them was wet. Nucky made a simple deal with the bootleggers. You can land your liquor on my beaches. You can store it in my warehouses. You can move it through my city. And in exchange, you give me a piece of every gallon. They called his cut the Nucky tax. It was 5% off the top of every shipment. By 1925, he was earning an estimated $500,000 a year, tax-free. That's roughly $9 million in today's money. Here's the thing. Nucky wasn't just taking. He was building. He paved roads. He funded hospitals. He bought turkeys for poor families every Thanksgiving. He bailed out fishermen when their boats went under. When a black family in the North Side needed rent money, they walked to Nucky's office and walked out with cash. No paperwork, no questions. The deal was simple. Come election day, you vote how Nucky tells you to vote. And 98% of the time, they did. Atlantic City wasn't a democracy. It was a kingdom. And Nucky was the king. But the king needed friends. Powerful friends. Which brings us to May 13th, 1929. The real summit. The meeting HBO dramatized but never fully captured. The Atlantic City Conference. Picture this. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre had just happened 3 months earlier. 7 men gunned down in a Chicago garage by Al Capone's crew. The newspapers were screaming. Federal pressure was mounting. The entire bootlegging industry was about to be exposed by the chaos coming out of Chicago. Something had to change. So Meyer Lansky, who was 27 years old and already running rum routes from Canada to Florida, used the cover of his honeymoon to organize a meeting Nucky agreed to host. He cleared out the Breakers Hotel. He cleared out the Ritz-Carlton. And from May 13th to May 16th, the most dangerous men in America gathered on the boardwalk to redraw the map. Capone was there with his consigliere Frank Nitti. Lansky brought his partner Bugsy Siegel. Luciano came up from New York with Joe Adonis and Frank Costello. The Philadelphia faction sent Boo Boo Hoff. Cleveland sent Mo Dalitz. Kansas City sent Johnny Lazia. Detroit, Boston, St. Louis. Every major bootlegging operation in the country was represented. And they sat together for 4 days, on the boardwalk, in the open, like businessmen at a convention. Nucky handled security. Nucky handled the press. Nucky made sure not a single arrest happened within the city limits. What did they decide in those 4 days? 3 things that would reshape America. First, they agreed prohibition was ending. They could feel it. They needed to diversify into gambling, narcotics, prostitution, and labor racketeering. Second, they agreed Capone was a problem, too violent, too visible, too dangerous to the brand. He needed to disappear for a while. And third, they agreed on a national governance structure. No more independent operators, no more random violence. A national commission would arbitrate disputes. Luciano would build it, Lansky would finance it, and the era of the modern American Mafia officially began on the Atlantic City Boardwalk in May of 1929. Here's the part HBO touched on but never fully explained. When Capone left that conference, he was arrested in Philadelphia within hours. He had a concealed pistol in his coat pocket. The arresting officers somehow knew exactly where to find him and exactly what he was carrying. He pleaded guilty within 16 hours. He was sentenced to 1 year in Eastern State Penitentiary. Some historians believe the entire arrest was prearranged at the conference. Capone needed to disappear, and a year inside a Philadelphia prison was the perfect cover. He served 7 months. When he came out, the heat had cooled. But the heat would not stay cool for long. By 1931, Al Capone was the most famous criminal in American history. He controlled an estimated 6,000 speakeasies in Chicago. He was earning $100 million a year. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $1.8 billion annually. He owned politicians, judges, police captains, newspaper editors. He gave interviews. He attended baseball games. He posed for photographs. He thought he was untouchable. The federal government had other ideas. A Treasury agent named Frank Wilson had been quietly building a case against Capone for years. Not for murder, not for bootlegging, for tax evasion. Wilson had discovered something simple but devastating. Capone had never filed a single income tax return, not one. In 10 years of running the most profitable criminal enterprise in American history, he'd never paid a penny in federal taxes. The case took 2 years to build. It required Wilson's team to trace cash transactions through dozens of front companies and bagmen. They needed witnesses. They needed ledgers. They needed proof. They got it. October 17th, 1931. Capone was convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion. Judge James Wilkerson sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison plus $50,000 in fines. He was sent first to Atlanta. Then in 1934, he was transferred to a brand new federal facility on a rock in San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz. By the time he arrived, the syphilis he'd contracted as a young man in Brooklyn was already rotting his brain. The most feared man in America spent his last years at Alcatraz, playing his banjo, hallucinating, and writing childlike letters to his son. He was paroled in 1939, his mind already gone. He died on January 25, 1947, at his estate in Palm Island, Florida. He was 48 years old. The cause of death was cardiac arrest following a stroke. The man who once controlled Chicago couldn't recognize his own wife at the end. But here's what they didn't tell you in the HBO version. Capone's downfall created an opportunity, and the man who seized it was sitting quietly in New York, watching, waiting, taking notes. Charlie Lucky Luciano. Luciano was Salvatore Lucania on November 24, 1897, in Lercara Friddi, Sicily. His family came to New York when he was 9. He grew up on the Lower East Side, where he met two kids who would change his life. A Jewish kid named Meyer Lansky, who'd later be known as Meyer Lansky, and another Jewish kid named Benjamin Siegel, later known as Bugsy. The three of them formed the Bugs and Meyer mob in their teens. They robbed dice games. They ran protection rackets. They learned the business from the inside out. By 1920, Luciano was working for Joe Masseria, one of the two most powerful Italian crime bosses in New York. The other was Salvatore Maranzano. By 1929, those two were at war. It was called the Castellamarese War, and it had killed dozens of men over 4 years. The old Italian mustache Pete wanted to keep doing business the old way, Sicilians only. No Jews, no Irish, no outsiders. Luciano thought that was stupid. Why turn away money because of someone's last name? So on April 15th, 1931, Luciano made his move. He invited Joe Masseria to lunch at Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant on Coney Island. They ate veal. They drank wine. They played cards. Then Luciano excused himself to go to the bathroom. While he was in there, 4 gunmen walked in. Vito Genovese, Bugsy Siegel, Albert Anastasia, Joe Adonis. They fired 20 rounds. Masseria took 6 bullets. He died face down, clutching the ace of diamonds. Luciano walked out of the bathroom, told the police he'd been washing his hands, and went home. He was 23 years old. He was now the king of New York. 5 months later, September 10th, 1931, Luciano did the same thing to Maranzano. He was killed in his office on Park Avenue by 4 men disguised as tax investigators. With both old bosses dead, Luciano restructured everything. He created the 5 families. He created the commission to govern them. He brought in Lansky as an equal partner, even though Lansky wasn't Italian. He invented the modern American Mafia, and for 5 years, it worked perfectly. Then Thomas Dewey happened, a young, ambitious special prosecutor in Manhattan who decided to make his career by taking down Luciano. The strategy was brilliant. Dewey didn't go after the murders. Murders were too hard to prove. He went after prostitution. Luciano was running an organized prostitution ring with 62 brothels across New York, 200 women. Dewey arrested 100 of them in a single raid in February 1936. He offered them deals. He pressured them. He found 3 who would testify that Luciano personally directed the operation. The trial was a spectacle. Luciano took the stand and denied everything. The jury didn't believe him. June 7th, 1936. Convicted on 62 counts of compulsory prostitution. Sentenced to 30 to 50 years in Dannemora prison. The most powerful gangster in America was finished. Except he wasn't. Because here's where it gets unbelievable. In 1942, World War II was at its peak. The Navy was terrified of German U-boats attacking ships in New York Harbor. They needed the docks secured. and every dock on the East Coast was controlled by Italian longshoremen who took orders from one man, Luciano. The Office of Naval Intelligence cut a deal with him directly. "Help us protect the harbor, and we'll move you to a better prison and consider commuting your sentence." Luciano agreed. The deal was called Operation Underworld. Not a single Nazi sabotage incident occurred in any port he controlled. In 1946, Governor Thomas Dewey, the same man who'd convicted him, commuted Luciano's sentence. The condition was permanent deportation to Italy. He landed in Naples in February of 46. He spent the rest of his life running international heroin trafficking from a villa outside Rome. He died of a heart attack on January 26, 1962, at Naples Airport. He was 64 years old. He was waiting for an American film producer who wanted to make a movie about his life. While Luciano ran the streets, Meyer Lansky ran the money. And Lansky was the smartest of all of them. 5'4", quiet, married, read the Wall Street Journal every morning. He never carried a gun. He never raised his voice. And by the 1950s, he was running gambling operations in Cuba, Las Vegas, Miami, and the Bahamas, worth an estimated $300 million a year. Lansky's genius was simple. He understood that the future of organized crime wasn't violence. It was casinos, legal where possible, skim from the top, hide the profits in Swiss banks and Caribbean shell companies. He invented the modern money laundering playbook. Every drug cartel and crooked banker since has just copied his template. The FBI chased Lansky for 40 years. They never got him, not once. He was indicted for tax evasion in 1970. He fled to Israel and tried to claim citizenship under the right of return. Israel rejected him. He came back to Miami in 1972 and faced trial. The jury acquitted him in 90 minutes. They could not prove a single dollar of illegal income. He died in his Miami Beach home of lung cancer on January 15, 1983. He was 80 years old. The man the FBI called the chairman of the board of organized crime died of natural causes in his own bed. He left an estate his family claimed was worth only $57,000. Investigators believe the real number was closer to $400 million. They never found a penny of it. And Nucky, the man who hosted them all? His end came slower. By 1936, prohibition had been over for 3 years. His protection money was drying up. His political machine was weakening, and a new federal prosecutor was building a case against him. The charge was the same one that got Capone, tax evasion. The IRS calculated that Nucky owed the government $125,000 in unpaid taxes on his gambling income. The trial began in July of 1941. Nucky was 58 years old by then, his hair gone white, his swagger faded. The jury convicted him on 3 counts. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and a $20,000 fine. He served 4 years at Lewisburg Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He was paroled on August 15, 1945. Here's the saddest part. When Nucky came home to Atlantic City, the world he'd built was gone. The boardwalk had changed. The hotels had new owners. The political machine had moved on. He moved into a modest apartment in Northfield with his second wife, Flossie, the showgirl he'd married before going to prison. He had no money. He had no power. He sold cars on commission for a while. He gave the occasional interview. He died on December 9, 1968, at the age of 85, in a nursing home in Northfield, New Jersey. The man who once ran an empire died on Medicare. So what does it all mean? What's the real story Boardwalk Empire could only hint at? The truth is, the men who built American organized crime weren't movie villains. They were entrepreneurs. They were politicians. They were husbands and fathers. They paid for their children's piano lessons with money soaked in blood. They went to church on Sunday and ordered murders on Monday. They understood something fundamental about America that most citizens never want to admit. Power isn't taken at gunpoint. It's purchased. It's negotiated. It's built one favor at a time over decades. Nucky Johnson didn't conquer Atlantic City. He worked it. For 30 years, he paved roads and bought turkeys and bailed out widows. And in exchange, he took 5 cents on every dollar that moved through his kingdom. By the time anyone noticed, he'd built something the federal government needed 3 trials and 6 years to dismantle. The Atlantic City Conference of 1929 wasn't just a mob meeting. It was the founding convention of a parallel American government. A government with its own taxes, its own laws, its own courts, and its own punishments. That government still exists in different forms today. The faces have changed. The cartels are different. The names are different. But the rules Luciano and Lansky and Nucky wrote on that boardwalk in May of 1929 are still being followed. Diversify. Avoid violence. Buy politicians. Launder the money. Never go to jail for something stupid like taxes. They forgot that last one. Every single one of them, and every single one of them paid the price. HBO gave us the romance, the suits, the music, the dance numbers, the whiskey, but the real story is colder than that. It's the story of how 5 men sat down on a boardwalk in 1929 and built a criminal empire that would outlive them by a century. Most of them died broken. One died forgotten. One died in exile. One died in his own bed of natural causes, having beaten every charge ever brought against him. Only Meyer Lansky won. That's the real lesson of Boardwalk Empire. The flashy ones die first. The loud ones go to prison. The quiet ones get rich and old. In the end, the Mafia wasn't built by killers. It was built by accountants who knew when to be killers. And the boardwalk where it all started is still there. In Atlantic City, the wood weathered, the lights dimmer, the secrets buried somewhere under the sand. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment below. What real-life mobster should we cover next?